You're listening to Subsound Radio. We bring you streaming and live broadcasting from the capital. This is the Alarpa Podcast. So, welcome back to the latest episode of the Alarpa Podcast. We are standing next to the Manzanares River, sitting more like we can see various people sunbathing the edge of the Calderon, which is soon to be the ex-home of Atletico de Madrid even, the Rojiblancos, the Colchoneros, and various other buildings. This is an area of great transformation. Another building is Centro Comercial, and one part of it is a lot of regeneration here. Very symbolic of the city, dividing it between north and south. As a born-again Madrileña, originally from Leonesa, what is your feelings towards the Manzanares?
Well, it's just that it's nice now that it's full, because when I was growing up it was always dry. And I remember there were a couple of ducks, and we always saw the ducks when we went away on trips. But that was it, pretty much. So yeah, it wasn't, I don't know, everybody always laughed from other areas, and for us when we came from Leon it was very strange because there was no water in the river.
And why is the water now? Has there been a rain dance, rain gods pouring forth?
Well, obviously when they redid the whole area, they kind of put like dams and like a system of...
This was an area that back in the past was probably very, very poor. Even around the Calderon area, which is the traditional barrio or neighbourhood of the Atletico supporters, there's been a lot of work done to make it better, and at the time these kind of works were controversial, but they paid dividends no end, because there's been a huge increase in green areas and housing and social amenities.
Oh, it's completely different, that's what I meant. Like when I was growing up, and you know, this was kind of like the edge of the city, and there was just nothing to see here. Never mind, like you wouldn't just like walk along the river and all this just for the fun, because it was like quite a nasty place.
Exactly. And it's because it's Plaza España, they're going to be making a green area over the next few years. Hopefully, if the government doesn't change, and if it does, they continue with the plan. So it's part of this greenifying of Madrid. And the Manzanares, as it does separate the city in a sense, no? Between in two distinctive parts. Is there a have-nots and a have-plenties on either side of the riverbank, do you think?
Meaning?
Well, is there a rich bank and a poor bank?
Well, I think now it's kind of like becoming more, thanks to like all these modern paths and everything that has been done around it. I think it's not as divided as it was before. I think it's more mixed, and in fact, like both sides of the riverbank are becoming like quite like appealing for people to live.
That's true, and along this thoroughfare and this river, you can find such delights as the Matadero, one part of it, which is a great cultural centre, former slaughterhouse that we've mentioned on many occasions on this very podcast. The Calderon, as we've mentioned in the introduction to this, the Centro Comercial, which is being built at the moment as well. And also there's a great cycle path. You can cycle literally from one end of Madrid to the other, along along the river. And you even get to this park where there's a huge Roman amphitheatre, great statues, a miniature coliseum. You don't know about this? You have to cycle to the end of the Manzanares, and then you have to go on a bit of a road, and then you go back into the park, so it's kind of hidden.
Is this a park that we've been to before?
We've never been there, but we should definitely go there.
Okay.
So it's a city, but it's not a city, it's not a river, I don't think, that is as symbolic of a city in the way other rivers of great European capitals is.
No, that's what I meant. That it was just like kind of something that was there in the outskirts, and it's only becoming like more popular now.
It's a dirty river, has to be said, but again, most rivers are. It's an unescapable fact of modern life. Do you think the famous rivers of Europe, they're more or less look like the Manzanares now with the things they have around them, but just because of the historical cachet, they're more well known. So now there's a little to differentiate between a Manzanares and another river.
No, I don't think so. I think it's well, it's nice that the way that it's been built, people can just like walk along. But I don't think it was ever designed. You know, it was more like a river in the outskirts of the city. It was never designed to be like a central part of the city, like many other like capital cities where the main buildings even are facing the river.
Yeah, of course.
And it's kind of like an artery of the city. I don't think this is the case here.
Yeah, it's not characteristic of the city. And we're talking about this because we're going to talk about the smell. So let's just be silent for maybe 5 seconds so the dear listener can listen to what we're listening to. Very quiet now. Shh. Breathtaking. So, how would you describe the smell of the river?
Okay, well, I think what we said before about the edge of the city is quite significant. I think the smell of the river, well, really is stagnant.
Yes.
But I don't know, it's kind of like a place where everything ends and almost like everything is like thrown away. Not quite like so literally, but...
Well, it's interesting because Puente Segovia, which is the bridge at the one end of this, is where I used to live. Used to visit me in my tower and sit on my balcony, and we'd sip lemonade and beer. Do you not remember this?
Once or twice maybe.
Exactly, 5 times in total. And this was built historically, I can't remember by who, but it was a big deal at the time because it represented this growth of the city beyond the limitations or the city walls that had been there for a while. So it was one of the first significant advancements of the city, which of course in most cities and historically is staggered and happens at different rates and in different times. For example, in La Latina, another place where I've lived as well, there's a huge gate, arc, we Puerto de Alcalá there as well. Not Puerto de Alcalá, it's Puerto de Toledo, of course.
Toledo.
Yeah, so this is which was the start of the thoroughfare where victorious armies would march through the city and would show either because they were conquering the city or returning from defending the city or advancing the interests of Spain. So these kind of points have great historical interest. So even though it looks great today because it's a nice place to bring families and to walk around, and there's playpens, and we've even been on the swings, haven't we? So
another life.
as a stagnant river, it smells bad, especially at high tide or even low tide because. Well, not tide, it's a river, so there's no tides. But when it's at a lower depth, the rubbish, the pungency of the rubbish kind of springs up. But then again, this is the great contradiction of the city. It's the urban jungle. There's a lot of dirt and grime, but it has its own inherent beauty, and that's definitely true of this river here. So we're talking about the sensations and particularly the smells in the Manzanares. And in the main part of the podcast, we're going to be going to different locations. Why? Because we are going to be celebrating in advance because we're so excited. Bloomsday, which is James Joyce, a Joycean celebration of Bloomsday, or Ulysses the book, and it's a book characterized like other Joyce's books about descriptions of taste and texture and of the senses, but particularly of the smell. And I know, for example, in Melbourne, they're centering their Bloomsday celebrations about this idea of smell. So in the main part of this podcast, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be on a journey through the nose, smelling the city and discovering the stories, the sounds and the smells, of course, of Madrid through different locations and drawing it a little bit closer to Joyce as well. So please, dear listener, join us for part 2 after the obligatory...
interlude?
Exactly. So this is part 2 of the podcast. We've moved from the Manzanares to the great barrio of Cuatro Caminos. Jamboree, which is kind of the same thing. Which is a beautiful neighborhood full of bars, people, and kind of old Madrid, no? A lot of the real Madrileños who spend most of their lives here because this is where, I suppose, the heart of the city in a sense, no? Not just Sol being the tourist centre or the actual centre of the centre, of Spain, but this is where the people live. This is where the real Spanish people hang out. This is where a lot of local shops have a lot of local flavour, no?
Yes, I would say that. Yeah.
Before we continue though, somebody neglected to tell us a couple of stories about the Manzanares while we were there. So that was very convenient, wasn't it?
I wonder who that was.
Well, we won't point any fingers because it's a podcast, so it'll be pointless. But what we can do is hear those stories right now, and the person telling the stories will give you the identity of the person who forgot to tell them in the first place. So without further ado, Maria, could you tell us the stories of the Manzanares?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say it's not you, it's me.
And this time it's actually true, isn't it?
It is true indeed. So, yeah, well, I just remember that the promenade along the river, the most like famous part in front of the stadium that we were talking about, is called Paseo de los Melancólicos. So, well, I think it's a fitting name because not only because of the supporters of Atletico, but also because well, it was kind of like the edge of the city, and I think it represents everything that people throw away from the city, not only like, you know, literally, but
like regrets and disappointments are thrown into the river or in the
funny
city.
you should say that. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Really? And was this done with a symbolic act, with writing your regret on a piece of paper and then tossing it, or was it just like a statement, a saying that you didn't actually physically enact it?
You know, like that's my interpretation, like because like the stench that comes from the river can only be compared to the stench of regret.
Wow, very nice imagery there. Well, it's interesting because when you hear about places, you always hear about like creation myths or stories behind why it's called this, or it's like for example, there's a hill on the west coast of Ireland. I think it's an island where we call it the Fallen Giant because it looks like a man lying down. So it has that kind of story, but it's not very often you say, well, this is the place where we leave all our stuff, even though it is part of other cultures, like in Asian cultures. I think in New Year's you write all your regrets and toss them into a fire, for example. So it is something that's common to other cultures, but I guess it's interesting to have a place that's like, well, okay, this is where the regrets stay. This is why it sticks, for example. Well, according to Dr. Mary, anyway.
Yes.
He was doctors in archaeology, not riverology.
Exactly.
It was or River Island fashion. So that's quite fascinating. And for example, well, actually, there's a link to my town. There's a bridge of tears, which I've told you about before. It's where the bridge that was taken by people off to America. So in those days when you're going to America, you're not coming back. There's no coming back, really. It was so expensive, so far away. So it was like an American wake is what we called it. So, you know, it's like a death in the family. So, you know, so again, the river and the town surrounding it is pretty miserable. I don't know if that's because of poor planning or just the people in it, or because the Bridge of Tears has contaminated it from the historical shedding of tears that did happen for people passing through on their way to the new world and a better life and all that kind of stuff. So that is fascinating. So now we are, as I said, in Chambery. Mm-hmm. We are currently standing outside
Casqueria.
Casqueria, which is an offal shop.
Yes.
So if you don't know what an offal shop is, it's basically guts and gristle and tissue and brains and livers and all these delicious things. And you have a personal connection to it.
Very much so, yes. This is like right next to the market where my mom used to buy, because it's not so far from the school that I went to. And yes, we used to like walk past it on the way home, and then my mom would always want to stop and buy some guts, like bits and pieces that we had to eat when we were little, because they have a lot of iron. And yes, and I just remember that I always used to dread it because
well, you still do, because
I still do, yes.
We're standing outside and your nose wrinkled and your face turned because the stench is so overpowering, and there's no wonder that the guy who actually owns the shop and works there is always in the doorway.
He is,
because
I never noticed that before.
It's a very small location.
It is.
And I guess old people just buy that kind of stuff, because it's like, I don't know, pre-war, after war.
No,
kind
yeah,
of food or something?
it's quite an old-fashioned thing because, like, well, I remember my grandma always used to like do, cow's brains and battered things like battered brains in like sheep stomach, things like that, which we still have.
And sauteed sphincters.
No, but it's practically, well, you've seen it. It's all there, and it's basically every part of the animal.
Well, it makes sense because back, I don't think you had much choice, so you just used everything you possibly could.
Yeah, exactly. It was about recycling, using all the resources that you had handy, and nothing got thrown.
You lived in London. Do you see any place like this in Newcastle?
I was gonna say, no, of course no. There's barely any butchers. Never mind this sort of
No
place.
butchers in Newcastle. Thought the English loved meat.
Yeah, I go like to. Yeah, that's why moms go to Iceland. Yeah.
That's true. All thanks to Kerry Katona. So, this is I think when he passes away, God forbid, touch wood, this is going to be closed down. This is a dying out institution. That it's not going to be around for the next generation for too much longer. I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a dying institution because we've been here for like 20 minutes and not at all has even like attempted to go in. And actually, I think they were very excited when we were like
hovering around.
Yeah.
Well, I think we were standing around for 20 minutes because the stench was so powerful. We didn't have the strength to move away, so we had to gather ourselves, get our Dutch courage, and walk away back to the car. But we're still outside though, so we're kind of like leaning against the car in the fresh air, taking in the sounds and the smells. And the smells is the thing that is going to run through this podcast, as it was in the first part, in this latest part as well. Because, as we mentioned, the Ulysses is full of great descriptions of smells, but also of food and of drink, and it has such a huge place in the Joycean world. And on Bloomsday, as we mentioned, which is June 16th, which is the day, because Ulysses is a novel, which is it happens over the course of a day, where you have flights of fancy, and it goes off to other kind of realms as well. But I mean, in terms of narrative, it's one solid day. And in that day, if you celebrate it now, you can go to Ireland, you can buy things from tobacconists, you can eat like special breakfasts prepared to celebrate the day, which is basically offal and guts and all that kind of stuff.
Really?
And it's basically a carnivore's dream. It's sausages and meat and all these kind of like always typical at the time. So not like your Galty, which is Irish branded sausages, a nice Irish fry-up you might get in a hotel or a pub. It's pure.
The real thing.
The real thing, dead animals on a plate, and you better enjoy it. And they did enjoy it because they were poor when they had a chance to luxuriate in the textures. Joyce would make his characters wax lyrical about it. So, the smell and the texture of all that kind of stuff is very evocative of certain characteristics and certain stations that people found themselves in the story. But my point is anyway that in Bloomsday celebrations, celebrating a novel, Ulysses, which a lot of people have bought but have never read. You can go to Dublin.
Who told you that?
You can go to Dublin or even other parts of the world. It's very international, and eat this kind of stuff that you see in the shop window. So it's kind of incredible because we always wax lyrical about how Ireland's been a lot of things in common. But the fact that you have these awful shops and it kind of is characteristic of something that's a very fundamental and earthy about the great Irish novel that is Ulysses is another string to that bow of the two things that define the country.
And I'm not sure this association has ever been pointed out before.
I don't think it has, but if you're listening to this podcast, you've just learned it. So that is fascinating. So we're taking you on a tour in the city. We're going to take a little breather here. We're going to go to opera.
Not breathe.
Not breathe because
it stinks.
Exactly. And we'll be joining you from a cafe, bringing you more Joycean tidbits and describing the smells and sounds of that cafe. So this is still technically part 2, but next time you hear from us, we're going to be in different locations. We're going to press pause on the podcast right now. So here we are in the Invisible Cafe just off Plaza Opera, so very close to where we were in Chambéry, and I guess close enough to the Manzanares as well. It's kind of between both places, I think, no?
More or less, yeah.
It's a beautiful cafe. As you can see, there are guidebooks everywhere from all years, from 2000, this year, from 2004, from 1987, even from the 70s, and there's 2 floors to this cafe. Staff are very friendly. What can I say? I mean, you just sit here, you can get good coffee, good tea, read books, explore the world from the comfort of your armchair, so you're the definition of an armchair traveller. and you can take in a lot of things. What do you smell right now at this moment?
Coffee.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's a very modern coffee house. Well, we've touched on this before in another podcast, how coffee houses were, back in the day, great centres of intellectual debate, and I'm sure they smelt of different textures because, I mean, you weren't cut off from the kitchen. Ingredients they were using probably were a bit more raw or rougher, and even Isaac Newton dissected a zebra in one cafe, so that you had a smell of guts and all that kind of stuff in the cafe. Yeah, so speaking of how cafes have changed from that sense of being these great social institutions to be something that's commonplace and commercial, same can be said of smell. And on this topic, what are you wearing? Not your clothes, your perfume. She's wearing a blue dress, in case you're interested. Very becoming.
I'm wearing like actually Earl Grey tea and cucumber.
Oh, really? Sounds disgusting.
Thank you so much.
1 second, I'm just gonna. Oh, it's not bad actually. Wow.
Well, there you go. That's Joe Malone for you.
Thank you for letting me smell you. I had to do this sniff test for the Earl Grey and it's Olive Grove. So, but yeah, as I was saying, smell has evolved. Back in the day, it was quite the intriguing thing. Writers like Joyce and other novelists kind of covered it quite a lot because they felt it was part of a synthetic, so it had a commercial value, but also was almost mystical or very artistic because it conjured up certain things, or it conjured up images, or it was associated with things that were of another plane. And I guess that there is an aspect of that to all things, not like even art or books, you have a commercial element to it, but also there's the artistic or mystical element where it conjures up ideas or images or beliefs, and you don't know where it comes from, but it's something that's instinctive. While Freud was dead against it because he felt it was something for animals, it was something base, it was something feral, exactly. While other people were worried a man who hung around with women who wore perfume would become feminine because the perfume would transfer onto him and would change his character. So, I mean, nowadays we don't really think that much about smell either. It's just something that we have, or you might stop to smell a flower, or you smell, something that you've made cooking-wise, but it's not one of the senses that we truly appreciate. When you think of the five senses, it's usually sight or hearing or, taste even, it tastes fantastic, but smell, I think, is one that we always forget about. But back in the day, quite controversial. And there's a novel that you read called Perfume, which is about a man's attempts to...
Perfume,
yeah, so, I mean, why does he start his quest, in the first place? I mean, what's the idea of this?
Well, he was really obsessed with capturing the smell, the scent of women, basically.
Okay.
So, to be able to extract that smell, he... is anybody going to read the book?
Okay. Well, he's kind of a pervert then, is he?
More of a psychopath, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. He kind of kills them to try and extract that smell, that scent. He wants to find the true scent of a woman.
Okay.
Funnily enough,
Wow. Okay. No. Well, interesting. So that's his story. Are you familiar? I mean, is there any Spanish writer who's grappled with this topic in a big way?
I don't think so. I don't know. Well, I suppose 16th, 17th century, kind of references to the smell of women and so on, a bit in the way you've described, and obviously the romantics were kind of big fans of this sort of thing, but I don't think it's a specific thing I can't think of any authors at the top of my head in Spain that were particularly focused on it to the extent that, for example, Joyce was.
Well, yeah, Joyce was obsessed with it. I mean, if you read moving away from Ulysses to one of his earlier novels, The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, the artist being a prototype of James Joyce, and the god in this book being James Joyce. He's the guy who Stephen Daedalus, the character, is aware of this universe that's kind of limits him and tests him and set up these obstacles for him, and that universe is controlled by Joyce. But the whole novel is anti-religious in nature, and the ironic thing is Joyce is kind of the god in this story. But it's all about how moving away from religion to being an artist. So it's how the boy becomes the man, and how the boy becomes an artist, because the boy is inexperienced, he's unknowledgeable, he feels these things in his core, he doesn't know that he doesn't like, but he doesn't know why he doesn't like him because he's too young. And as he gets more experience, he becomes more confident, and he becomes master of his nose. He can, the things he smells, he either reacts to them in a more positive, mature way, or he's more in control in how he reacts to it. So a lot of smells that are described in the early part of the novel regarding his childhood. For example, anything related to church smells like incense. He absolutely hated it. And there's a strong association with smells of the church, and I think that signifies that Joyce had a strong aversion. Well, I mean, he had a strong aversion to religion, and the smells that the characters smelt were overpowering, and they always, I feel like most smells arose outside the control of the protagonist, and especially in a place like a church where the priest is shaking this incense holder and he's actively spreading it. So I think it again emphasizes in this stage, in this state, Stephen Dedalus is kind of a victim, for lack of a better word, of the smells that are around him, and he's experiencing things that are outside of his control. So I think in that sense, smell has a huge part in that novel. And there's a great quote I found from a great essay, and we'll post the title of this essay on the podcast. I can't remember the name.
In a link where you can download it.
Exactly. So here is where Joyce comes into the picture. He stands something to gain from Stephen's instinctive repugnance toward a faint, winey smell. Of all the things to be repulsed by that are conducive to a later rejection of the church, why not Stephen's first communion, which represents both his initiation into the church and his first contact with Christ? Stephen, being too young to have formed moral and intellectual objections to the church that would create such an aversion, is easily controlled by Joyce, who has implanted this drive in Stephen's unconscious as a foundation for his repudiation of church doctrine as a young adult. So it's actually very fascinating how he controls the story. But later on, for example, a smell is used in this novel to kind of reveal someone's subconscious desires and drives, which is kind of ironic because in this novel Joyce is setting up the story and the character and the challenges for the protagonist. So in a sense that is true, and in another sense it's not really true, but smell is associated with what the artist really wants. And later on in the novel, which is where the character kind of becomes the artist, there's a very famous expression where he says, he's like smelling a vagrant, like animals and dirt. He's like, I love this smell. And so it symbolizes how in the church, for example, the smells are soft and incensey and winey and all this kind of stuff, but it's the real smells that really appeal to him, and he wants to be in that. And that's what being an artist is like, living life and experiencing the different dirty details of that, and especially at the time, because he wrote a lot about poor people and the poor neighborhoods. And I think a lot of the artists at the time were very familiar with those surroundings because they themselves were poor. But I think it's interesting as well because smell, I mean, one thing it does do is just give form to abstract concepts like artistry and religion. So I think even just as a narrative technique, outside of the fact that it's used by Joyce to beat an anti-religious drum, I think it is very useful in the sense that it does give this form or shape to something that is abstract, like religion or artistry.
Wow, well, what can I say to that?
Absolutely nothing. So that's why we're going to. Well, before we finish, actually, see there's a guy walking past with an Irish GAA jersey. So that's quite coincidental. Doesn't look Irish though, so God knows where he got that. So, we're going to order another cup of coffee. You might have heard the music in the background. That hopefully it wasn't too distracting. You know, cafes these days force their piped pop music down on top of us, and it's impossible to escape. But we will join you momentarily on the road while we're driving for part 3 and the final part of this podcast. And we'll be hearing more from Mary as well. So here we are, stuck in traffic on this hot Madrid day, and you know what smells? Sweat and tarmac melting and desperation, and a city on the verge of hysteria. So somebody say riot. So I hope you enjoyed our tour of the city through the nasal passages and a little bit of Joyce thrown in for good measure. and I'm glistening like a dog eating pedigree chum because of all the sweat on my face. So,
Lovely.
So some parish noises, Maria.
Okay, what's going on? We have a lot of things going on. We just published our latest video on our YouTube channel, and that was about
well, obviously it was about poetry and a photographic exhibition that we've been to, focusing on 100 years of the Leica camera, and it kind of, I felt it encompassed all of the exhibitions that we've spoken about on this podcast before, so it was a nice thing to commemorate. So what we did was we did something very poetic and pretentious, might I say, and then we planted our Alarpa flag on the hill, one of the 7 hills in Vallecas, and one can only assume that flag is still there, and you can check it out on our YouTube channel, on Twitter, and
or on the hill.
Or on the hill. This is where all the magic happens. So that's it for another week. Join us for our weekly podcast for more hip and happening things, and we'll be actually going to a cool exhibition in Botanical Gardens next week. That's one thing we gotta do. Go to the Feria de Libros, the book fair, which we went to last year in the Retiro Park, which is again in the Retiro Park as it is every year, and God knows lots of other things. No?
Yeah, plenty.
Anything. So this is Enda signing off for this El Arpa podcast. Damn it, girl, put some passion into it.
And Mary driving away.
Hallelujah! You're listening to Subsound Radio. We bring you streaming and live broadcasting from the capital. This is the El Arpa podcast.